Hello everyone, I am David Roberts, the POA and POB teacher here at the Student Hub, and today what we're going into is the central bank. We'll be looking at the definition, the features, the functions of the central bank, and then we'll dive straight into past paper questions. So let's go. I just blessed you with two pictures of central banks of two countries, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. For your information's sake, you're welcome. Now let's get into the definitions. So what is the central bank? The central bank is a regulatory body that governs the monetary systems of a nation. So in countries, you have the money, right? And what could happen to money is that there could be too much money in a nation, and there could also be too little money in a nation. So what the central bank does is that they use different mechanisms to control how much money is in the nation to prevent what we have something called inflation or the deflation of money. So features, one of the first features is that the central bank, they oversee the operation of the nation's governments and commercial banks, and it's highly understandable. Like these two institutions, they have very strong impact in how much money is in an economy, and so therefore to control the money in the economy, you must control or oversee through control, monitoring, giving advice to the governments and commercial banks in a nation. Next thing, boom, we have the central bank is not privately owned. It is owned by the government. And so therefore, go on. 3, the individuals from the public cannot deposit money into the central bank nor take loans. Yes, guys, this is sad reality. If you want to do that, you must go to a commercial bank, because the central bank, they don't deal up with us. They more oversee like bigger stuff. So going now into the functions of the central bank. One, we're looking at it from 3 perspectives. We're looking at it for the nation, we're going to look at it for the government, and for commercial banks. So first and foremost, for the nation, what they do, the central bank prints and issues the notes and coins in a nation, which is kind of a smart thing, because if everyone could print their own money, we'll have too much money in the economy that will cause inflation, and so therefore the central bank, they oversee, and they are the only people who could do that, and that's called seigniorage. Nice. Next thing they do is control the money supply and ultimately the money systems of a nation. So they control how much money how much money is created into a nation, so how much money can be printed, and then after they also control the central bank, so even the money that is not printed and that is in the form of deposits, they would control that. They also prevent, as we will have discussed, inflation through the monetary policies that they would implement. Now, with regards to the government, first and foremost, they act as the government's bank. So the money that the government has, it is overseen by the central bank. Right? They control the money of the government. 2, the central bank advises governments on monetary and economic matters. So if the government realizes that there is starting to have some problems in the economy, which is you may have too much economic activity, or right now with COVID-19 we have less economic activity going on, the central bank will advise the governments on how to rectify the problems. And the governments, what they do, they implement something called fiscal policies, which is they either increase or decrease government spending on taxes. And so the central bank, they will advise them as a, hey, here this, increase the taxes, hey, increase government spending or decrease it, and so on. So that is the central bank job there. Going on, the central bank helps the governments generate finances for projects through issuing bills and bonds on their behalf. So whenever the government, they want to have a project, usually is financed through a long-term loan in the form of a bond, and these bonds are not issued by the government, they are issued by the central bank. The central bank is like they better at handling these projects, and so therefore boom, the central bank does it on the government's behalf. So those are three functions: government. We're going on into commercial banks. So we have, again, just as they act as the bank of the government, they act as the bank of commercial banks. So this is that. Moving on, they are the lender of last resort to commercial banks. So commercial banks, they sometimes go into financial difficulties, and the central bank will be able to give assistance to them through providing short-term loans to the commercial banks to help them come out of the problems they may have. 3, they set liquid asset requirements for commercial banks. So this is a percentage of deposits that are made in commercial banks must be stored in the central bank, and this is from this pool in the liquid asset requirements that the central bank would be able to give loans to commercial banks. And as well, this is used to control how much money commercial banks have. So if there's too much money in commercial banks, what the central bank does is that they increase the liquid asset requirement, and so therefore commercial banks will have to give central banks more money, and so therefore commercial banks will have less money to use, and so they would use, because they have less money to use, they would do less economic activity. And then we have vice versa. If you want to increase economic activity, you would decrease the liquid asset requirement, and so therefore commercial banks will have more money and they could be able to do more economic activities. Alright, so we're sticking with the commercial banks, and we are going to look into functions that the central bank has to the commercial banks, and there are 3. I'm just going to show you. So we have the liquid asset ratio, the bank rate, and minimum reserve requirements. So these are 3 ways that central banks control the operations of the commercial banks. So first one we're looking at is the liquid asset ratio, also known as liquid asset requirement. So the central bank advises commercial banks on how much liquid assets they are required to hold for customer withdrawals. So this is where the central bank will determine or will tell commercial banks that they are required to hold a certain amount of liquid assets. This is like deposits from customers. They must hold a certain amount and they cannot give it out in loans and investments. And so therefore, if the liquid asset requirement, for example, if it increases, that means that the commercial banks, they have to give out less loans. And in order to give out less loans, what they'll do is that they'll increase the interest rates on loans and investments, which make loan and investments more expensive. And so therefore, that will decrease how much loans and investments they will be given out to their customers. And of course, vice versa. If the liquid asset requirement decreases, that means that they could give out more loans, because each time they give out a loan, they're going to have less money. So, and if they could give out more loans, that means they'll decrease their interest rates. Alright? So that is liquid asset requirements. Next one, we have bank rate. So this is the rate provided for loans to commercial banks that are suffering from liquidity problems. So remember, we're going back to whenever they're going through trials and tribulations of a commercial bank, and the central bank swoops in as the savior, the central bank will give them a specific rate. There's a specific rate that they will give out. There's a rate that they will set in order to give out the loans, and this rate can either be increased or decreased based on what the central bank wants ultimately. So if the central bank wants to decrease economic activity, what they will do is that they will increase the rates or the bank rates or loans that they give to commercial banks. As they increase these rates, the commercial banks will increase their interest rates on loans and investments as well. When they increase their rates of loans and investments, guess what's going to happen? People are going to take less loans, people are going to invest less because it's expensive, and so therefore economic activity goes down. And vice versa. If you want economic activity to go up, let's say for example, because of COVID-19, you want economic activity to increase, and it's happened in real life. What the central bank advise is that they allow the banks they tell banks, banks would have decreased the central bank would have decreased the bank rate, or the bank rate, which is the price of loans that they give to commercial banks. As such, the commercial banks would decrease their interest rates as well, and so therefore this would increase loans, increase investments, and ultimately increase economic activity. Right? Finally, we have minimum reserve requirement. So this is a certain percentage of deposits made in commercial banks that is stored in the central bank. So this is how much the shots already discussed this though, so we double talking, but again, let's get into it. So the minimum reserve requirement is a percentage of the deposits that are made into commercial banks. They must slap it into the central bank, and of course, if the reserve increases, that means that the commercial banks will have less money to give out deposits to customers, and so therefore they will increase their interest rates, which will decrease their interest rates, and the decreases in interest rates will mean that they will give out more loans, which will increase economic activity. Alright, so with this, let's get straight into the past paper questions. So the first one we have is May-June 2015, question 5, part B. Describe two measures. So there's two measures which a central bank may use to influence the behavior of the commercial bank, and this is for 6 marks. So of course that means there will be 3 marks per measure. I mean literally just describe these measures. So the first one we have is the liquid asset requirement, and this is where commercial banks are required to hold a predetermined amount of liquid assets, for example, deposits from customers. And then after, to get the next mark, we have if the central bank decreases their liquid asset requirement. To be describing, we have to describe what is entailed in liquid asset requirement. The commercial bank will decrease their liquid assets, and how do they do that? So what they'll do is that they'll increase their loans and investments, which will happen through a decrease in their interest rates, as we just described. Right? And of course, vice versa will happen if the liquid asset requirement, if it increases, that means that they have to give out less loans, they have to give out less investments, so they will increase their interest rates. The second one, 2, the bank rate. So the central bank provides loans at specific bank rates to commercial banks that are suffering from liquidity problem. And what are the effects of increases or decreases in the bank rate? So we have the increase of the bank rate. This means that the commercial banks will increase their interest rates as well, and this will lead to a decrease in loans and investments by customers of commercial banks, and vice versa will happen if they decrease the bank rates. Going on to the next questions, we have May-June 2011, question 3, part C. Explain the role of the central bank as we have 1, an advisor to the government, and 2, a lender of last resort, for 3 marks each. So the first one we're looking at is as an advisor to the government. So the central bank, what they do is that they advise governments on any monetary and economic problems, and what the governments use is fiscal policies. This is increases and decreases in taxes and government spending to regulate the economy. And so therefore what the central bank does is that the central bank gives advice to governments on whether they should increase or decrease their taxes on government spending for the health of the economy. And if you want to be more specific, is that like if you go into the fiscal policies, which is if you want to increase economic activity, you will decrease the taxes and increase government spending, like in these COVIDious times. That is what they will do. And vice versa, if inflation is happening, you want to decrease economic activity, increase taxes, decrease government spending, and be on the inside. I hope I'm not confusing you all. Let's go on. Next one we have is the lender of last resort. Again, so we're looking, the central bank provides loans to commercial banks that need the funds urgently. So just describing kind of what lender of last resort means. And then within this, we have the loans are given at predetermined bank rates that affect, scratch this off, that affect these the commercial bank's interest rates. And we describe how the bank rate, we just discussed it. So we know at the bank rate, the central bank, what they would do is that they increase the bank rate to decrease economic activity, because the ripple effect of the increase in the interest rates at the commercial banks leading to decrease in loans and investments, which will decrease economic activity, and vice versa will happen if they decrease the bank rates. Right? So that is for May, June 2011. And finally, we're going to look at a nice little Jan paper, which states list 3 services offered by each of the following institutes. So the first question they had asked is for commercial banks, but we're focusing on central banks. And these are 3 services offered by them. So we have 1, the commercial banks are the bankers' banks or banks. Yes. So this commercial bank oversees the commercial bank's activities. 2, acts as the government's, I should highlight, right? 2, acts as the government's bank. So the central bank monitors the monetary and economic matters of the government. And finally, they in charge of printing and issuing money. If you want to show them that, hey, I know big words, it's called seigniorage, right? So, and with that, what we'll do is we'll do something called conclude. Thank you very much for you all coming out. Again, I am David Roberts, the POB and POA teacher here at the Student Hub, and I just want to thank you for coming out. And as you'll see at the top here, I just spreading peace, love, guidance to everyone. All the best in the exam. Remember this quote: never put off for tomorrow what can be done today. Procrastination is the thief of time. Consistency is the key. Thank you.